What if one quiet decision at an airport exposed a nation's forgotten sense of honor? What if a uniformed officer, carrying the weight of a fallen soldier, was told to step aside, and the world saw it happen? This isn't just a story about a flight denied. It's a story about dignity, silence, and a moment that shook millions. Stay with us, because what happened next turned outrage into action and one man's mission into a movement. The morning air at Lakeside International Airport was crisp and ordinary. Just another day of departures, coffee lines, and rolling suitcases. No one noticed the man who walked in with slow, steady steps, dressed in full military uniform. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale, age 49, wasn't there for business or vacation. He was on a mission that had nothing to do with rank or travel miles. He was escorting the remains of Sergeant Ethan Brooks, a 24-year-old soldier who never made it home. Out on the tarmac, a flag-draped casket waited quietly inside a military vehicle. It was the kind of weight no one sees, but Marcus felt it with every breath. Ethan wasn't just a name on a file. He was a real kid, someone's son, someone's best friend. His life had been full of plans, now all folded under a flag, carried by duty and grief. Marcus didn't need recognition. He didn't want headlines. He just wanted to complete this final act of respect with the dignity it deserved. In his hand was a folder of military documents, authorization, ID, orders. Everything was in place. This wasn't a favor. It was protocol. But more than that, it was a promise. As he stepped up to the check-in counter, he removed his cap and spoke with calm authority. He had done this before, but this time felt different. He thought of Ethan's mother, who had asked him through tears, "Please don't let him come home alone." That voice stayed with him. He didn't expect applause, just acknowledgement, just a nod and a path forward. A quiet moment of shared understanding between those who serve and those who benefit from that service. But what came next would catch everyone off guard. Because before the plane ever left the ground, before wheels hit the runway or announcements were made, something unthinkable happened. Marcus was told he couldn't board. No explanation, just a policy, just a flat, emotionless refusal. In that moment, a quiet mission became something else entirely, and no one in the terminal, not the airline staff, not the passengers in line, knew that they were standing at the edge of a storm that was about to break. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale stood at the check-in counter, his hat respectfully in hand, his military orders laid flat on the desk. The young woman behind the counter, her name tag reading Emily, glanced at the documents briefly. She began typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced speed. But then, she paused. It was subtle, just a moment too long. Her brow furrowed slightly. She glanced at the papers again, then back to the screen. Something had changed in her posture. "Sir," she said, her voice suddenly tighter than before. "Can I see your ID again?" Marcus handed it over without hesitation. His voice remained steady, professional. "Of course." Emily took the ID and walked a few steps toward a coworker. She whispered something he couldn't hear, her eyes flicking in his direction. The other agent, a man in his 50s with silver hair and weary eyes, looked up briefly, then looked back down at the screen. The exchange lasted no more than 10 seconds, but Marcus had been in too many tense rooms to miss the signs. Something was wrong. Emily returned. Her smile was mechanical, stretched too tightly. "I'm sorry, sir," she began, avoiding his gaze, "but there appears to be a security protocol issue. Unfortunately, we won't be able to allow you to board at this time." Marcus blinked once, slowly. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," he said evenly, tapping the folder of official military orders with two fingers. "Everything here is in order." "Yes, sir, I understand, but we have to follow protocol. It's just policy." The man who had been watching from afar, clearly a supervisor, approached. His name tag read, Greg Sanders. His voice carried the smooth, rehearsed tone of someone used to dodging accountability. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. There's nothing personal here. It's just a routine security issue." Marcus straightened his back. "I've been in the Army for nearly 30 years. I've flown with military escorts more times than I can count. There is no policy preventing me from boarding a flight while performing an escort. So if this is routine, let's be clear. What's the real reason I'm being denied? Greg shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around. Sir, again, I assure you this isn't personal. Just an extra layer of precaution. Precaution for what? Marcus asked. By now, a veteran wearing a U.S. Navy hat had stepped out of line and crossed his arms. His name was Roy Alvarez. He wasn't smiling. I've flown commercial in uniform plenty of times, Roy said, his voice firm. You don't stop someone on escort duty. You just don't. Others began murmuring. A young woman in a red scarf pulled out her phone and started recording. Another man leaned sideways to get a better view. Greg looked visibly rattled now. Sir, I'm going to step into the back and double-check with management. Please do, Marcus said calmly, though his jaw was tight. Emily remained behind the desk, frozen in place, her eyes fixed on the screen, but clearly not reading it. Marcus didn't move. He stood tall, composed, unwilling to budge. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about Ethan Brooks, about a promise, about dignity. And whether the airline realized it or not, the moment they said no, they had just made the wrong person wait. The quiet in the terminal was now something else entirely, expectant, uncomfortable. Like everyone could feel the line that had just been crossed, but no one was quite sure what would come next. For a long moment, no one said anything. The clack of keyboards, the ding of boarding announcements, the rolling wheels of luggage, all of it seemed to fade beneath the silence gathering at Gate 14. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale remained motionless, his hands calmly resting on the counter, but his presence radiated tension. Behind him, the line of passengers was no longer just waiting, they were watching, closely. Then a voice broke the silence. You having trouble with his military clearance? Marcus didn't turn immediately. The voice came from behind, gravelly, deliberate, like someone used to being heard. Slowly he turned to face the man who'd spoken. A tall, weathered gentleman stepped forward from the line. Late 60s, maybe older. His dark blue jacket was worn at the seams, and on his head rested a faded Navy cap embroidered with the words, USS Carl Vinson, CVN 70. A veteran. The man stepped forward, arms folded, jaw set. Name's Roy Alvarez, he said simply, loud enough for the counter staff to hear. Served 3 tours, been through TSA more times than I care to count. Not once did I see protocol stop a uniformed soldier from bringing one of our own home. So what's this really about? The agent at the desk, Emily, swallowed hard but didn't answer. The supervisor, Greg Sanders, was still nowhere to be seen. The silence lingered, heavy and sharp. Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Unbelievable, a woman in a denim jacket muttered. She stood beside her husband, eyes narrowing, as she looked from Marcus to the staff behind the counter. This man's in uniform, escorting someone who died for this country, and they're giving him a hard time? A few people raised their phones, cameras already rolling. Someone whispered, "Start live streaming this." Someone else said, "Tag the airline." The shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. What began as an uncomfortable delay had now turned into something else, something fragile and dangerous for the airline. The crowd was still polite, still composed, but the glances, the phones, the low voices, they all said the same thing. This isn't right. Then a younger woman, no more than 25, stepped forward. Her phone was already in her hand, the red live icon blinking in the corner. She hesitated, but her voice was clear. "Excuse me, sir," she said, looking at Marcus. "Just to be sure, I heard correctly, right? They're not letting you fly even though you're on military duty?" Marcus nodded. "That's correct." Her lips parted, like she couldn't believe what she'd just confirmed. Then, without another word, she turned her phone to face him. "People need to see this," she said. Another voice joined. "This is wrong," a man said as he held up his phone to record. "This man's literally escorting a fallen soldier, and they're blocking him?" Emily shifted behind the desk, her hands trembling over the keyboard. She didn't know where to look. The line of passengers was no longer just waiting. They were standing witness. Quiet, yes, but no longer passive. From the corner of the gate, a young man in a hoodie typed furiously on his phone. "This is blowing up," he whispered to no one in particular. "It's already trending." Marcus didn't move. He didn't have to. The story had already started writing itself, and it was spreading faster than any boarding announcement could override. And somewhere, behind a frosted glass door, a supervisor was realizing far too late that this situation would not go away with a polite apology. It was too late for damage control. The public had just picked its side. Within minutes, what started as quiet disbelief had turned into a digital wildfire. Phones were up everywhere. Live streams, tweets, short clips. People weren't just recording anymore. They were reporting, commenting, sharing. At first it was a few murmured voices, then it spread like a spark on dry grass. Someone tweeted, "West Wind's Air just denied a military officer escorting a fallen soldier. Absolutely disgusting. Let him honor his brother." The hashtag caught on immediately. By the windows, a young woman gasped. She turned her phone to show her husband. "It's on Twitter," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "It's blowing up. Look, already over 10,000 retweets." A man in line opened Facebook and blinked in shock. "It's on the Veterans Justice page," he muttered. "They're calling for a boycott." At the counter, Emily's fingers hovered above the keyboard. She wasn't typing anymore. Her eyes kept flicking toward the phones pointed her way. She looked frozen, caught somewhere between fear and regret. The tension inside the terminal grew sharper. The airline staff were still pretending to check the issue, but everyone watching knew this was no longer about protocol. This was about accountability, about dignity, about a failure that couldn't be spun or silenced. Back in the crowd, Roy Alvarez stood like a rock. He wasn't filming. He didn't need to. His arms were crossed, his jaw set. "You don't treat people like this," he said under his breath. "Not our soldiers. Not ever." Passengers whispered to each other, "This is insane. Are they serious? He's in uniform." The energy had shifted entirely. No one cared about boarding anymore. They cared about this, about what it meant, about what it revealed. Then came the final blow. A man near the Starbucks turned his screen toward the crowd. "CNN just picked it up," he announced. "Front page headline, U.S. Army officer denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Airline under fire." Marcus Hale remained still, calm. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply adjusted the folder under his arm, eyes steady ahead. He had seen chaos before, but this was something else. This was truth, caught in real time. And now the whole country was watching. Major Beckett turned to Daniel Kessler, the airline manager who now looked visibly shaken. "Mr. Kessler," Beckett said, "as of this moment, Lieutenant Colonel Hale and the remains of Sergeant Ethan Brooks will no longer be flying commercial." Kessler blinked. I beg your pardon." Beckett didn't flinch. "The Pentagon has arranged for private military transport. A jet is already on standby at McAllister Airfield, 20 minutes from here. This matter is now under direct military jurisdiction." The murmur that followed was different this time. Not outrage, not disbelief, respect. People shifted, whispered, nodded. They understood what had just happened. Kessler tried to salvage something. "Sir, we were just in the process of—" "You were just in the process of covering your tracks," Beckett interrupted, his voice polite but edged with steel. "This isn't a customer service error. It's a failure of basic human decency." He turned to Marcus. "We're ready when you are, Colonel." Marcus gave a slight nod. "Understood." The Marine veteran, Roy Alvarez, stepped forward once more. "Appreciate you, brother," he said, voice low but heavy with meaning. Marcus turned to him. "We look out for our own." Then he looked at the crowd, those who had pulled out their phones, those who had spoken up, those who had refused to look away. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. With one final adjustment to his uniform, Marcus Hale turned his back to the counter, not toward the gate, not toward West Wind's Air, but toward something greater, toward justice, toward honor, and most importantly, toward home. As Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale exited the terminal beside Major Beckett, the energy inside Gate 14 shifted from tension to reckoning. The man they had tried to quietly push aside had left with his dignity intact, and with the nation's support rallying behind him. But inside the walls of West Wind's Air's corporate office, the storm was only just beginning. Within hours, the footage from the terminal flooded every major social media platform. TikTok clips showing the moment Marcus was refused had already garnered over 1 million views. Twitter was ablaze with outrage under the trending tag number, "Let him honor his brother." Veterans groups, military families, and even celebrities chimed in. The tone wasn't just angry, it was unified. One tweet from a retired four-star general read, "Every fallen soldier deserves honor. Every officer carrying them home deserves respect. What happened at Lakeside is disgraceful." News anchors picked up the story. Morning shows ran segments with headlines like, "Military escort denied, Airline faces firestorm." Panels debated airline policies, corporate coldness, and the widening gap between civilian understanding and military sacrifice. A retired colonel on national television said bluntly, "This isn't about one man being denied a seat. This is about a nation deciding whether we still remember what sacrifice looks like." Under pressure, West Winds Air's public relations team scrambled. First came the tweet, "We are investigating the unfortunate incident at Lakeside Airport and deeply regret any offense caused." But the replies were savage. Screenshots of Marcus standing stoically at the counter flooded their comment section. Users replied with one line over and over again, "You don't regret what you did. You regret getting caught." The airline's stock began to dip. Not dramatically at first, just a few percentage points, but investors took notice. Public trust, the one thing you can't buy back with vouchers or press releases, was evaporating. Then came the class action petition. A coalition of military advocacy groups filed an official complaint against West Winds Air for discriminatory treatment and failure to uphold protections for active service members under federal law. The petition, already signed by over 250,000 people within 3 days, demanded not only accountability, but federal oversight of airline procedures involving military escorts. Back at the terminal, Emily Tran, the desk agent who had initially refused Marcus, was placed on administrative leave. Sources later revealed she had never personally dealt with military documentation before and had acted out of uncertainty. But the public was unforgiving. Her image had gone viral, frozen in the act of saying no to a decorated officer. Greg Sanders, the supervisor who backed the denial, submitted his resignation by the end of the week. Internal emails leaked days later showed that several employees had raised concerns about mishandling the situation, only to be told to wait it out. Finally, West Winds Air's CEO, Peter Langford, made a public appearance at a press conference. Standing stiffly at a podium flanked by apologetic branding, he addressed the cameras. "We offer our sincerest apologies to Lieutenant Colonel Hale, to the family of Sergeant Ethan Brooks, and to all service members. What happened does not reflect our values. We are reviewing all policies and taking corrective action immediately." But for many Americans, it was too little, too late, because respect for service isn't something you apologize for after the fact. It's something you live by in the moment. Marcus Hale never released a statement. He didn't need to. He had already spoken, with silence, with discipline, and with honor. And the world had heard him loud and clear. 2 days after the firestorm at Lakeside International Airport, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale stood once again in full uniform, this time not beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of a terminal, but under the soft golden sun of Clearwater, Florida. The sky was clear, the air still, and silence hung over the small military cemetery like a sacred vow. The private jet arranged by the Pentagon had landed quietly at a local airstrip, away from cameras and crowds. No press conference, no flashing lights, just the low hum of the transport engine and the solemn rhythm of boots on pavement. Marcus didn't need the world to witness this moment. He needed only one family to know their son had come home with honor. Sergeant Ethan Brooks's casket, still draped in the flag he had served, was carried by 6 uniformed soldiers in perfect unison. Each step they took was deliberate, reverent, as if the very earth beneath them understood the weight of their mission. At the end of the path stood Ethan's parents, his mother clutching a folded photograph, his father holding a trembling salute longer than most men could bear. Marcus walked behind the casket, his hands steady, his expression unreadable. Inside, though, he felt the storm of emotion surge. Grief not just for Ethan, but for every name he'd carried over the years. Every friend lost, every letter written home, every mother's voice on the other end of the line. As the final notes of taps played, Marcus stepped forward and presented the folded flag to Ethan's mother. His voice, low and firm, carried with it the weight of tradition and the tenderness of shared sorrow. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your son's honorable and faithful service. She accepted it with both hands, tears falling without sound. No words passed between them, only a nod, and the kind of look that needs no explanation. Marcus stood back, watching as the ceremony concluded. No cameras, no headlines, just the sound of wind in the trees and the memory of a young man who gave everything. He didn't stay long after, just long enough to know the mission was complete, and as he walked alone back to the car waiting at the edge of the cemetery, Marcus Hale felt something settle inside him. Not closure, not peace, but resolve. Because in a world of policies and procedures, someone still had to carry the weight of doing what was right. And that day, like every day before it, he did. A week had passed since Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale walked out of Lakeside International Airport with quiet resolve and a mission that refused to be denied. But across the country, the ripple effects of that moment still echoed, on screens, in conversations, and in the hearts of those who had watched it unfold. The story had become more than just a headline. It had become a symbol, a mirror held up to a nation, asking, do we still know how to honor those who serve? For days, news outlets continued to dissect the incident, not just as a customer service failure, but as a cultural reckoning. Talk shows featured veterans sharing similar stories of being overlooked, disrespected, or forgotten in moments when they needed dignity most. But what stood out more than the anger was the unity. Civilians and military families alike wrote letters to Marcus. Schools invited him to speak. Churches prayed for Ethan Brooks by name. And online, the hashtag #Honor is the Standard began to circulate, sparked by one of Roy Alvarez's recorded remarks. Respect should never depend on cameras. It should be the standard. West Winds Air, under mounting pressure, announced a full review of employee training programs and committed to working directly with veteran organizations to prevent future failures. But in truth, the public had already passed judgment, not just on the airline, but on a deeper societal blind spot. Marcus Hale never sought attention. He turned down interview requests, declined award ceremonies, and issued no statement. His silence remained as powerful as it had been that morning at the counter. Because for him, the mission had never been about making noise. It had been about Ethan. And through that mission, a reminder had been delivered, clear, quiet, and impossible to ignore. Honor isn't earned by going viral. It's upheld by how we treat people when no one's watching. In the end, Sergeant Ethan Brooks came home not as a name on a tag, but as a soldier carried by the weight of promise, guarded by a brother in arms, and remembered by a nation awakened. Because when respect becomes the norm, not the exception, that's when we truly honor the fallen, and that's a legacy worth protecting. Respect is not a privilege to be granted after public outrage. It's a standard that should be upheld in every quiet moment, especially for those who gave everything in service to others. Sergeant Ethan Brooks didn't ask to be remembered with headlines. He simply deserved dignity. And Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale reminded the world that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that don't raise themselves. Let this story remind us all, honor is not about ceremony, rank, or spotlight. It's about standing up when it's easier to stay silent. Because real respect is lived, not just spoken. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who values honor, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what this meant to you.